nation in all the Caribbean. Jamaica stood on the threshold of independence.
Jamaicans are poorer than they were 2 years ago, with 10% living in extreme poverty.
In February 1962, Norman Washington Manley, who was the Premier of Jamaica, went to the United Kingdom to negotiate for Jamaica's independence with a bipartisan team. And as he spoke to the individuals in the colonial office in the United Kingdom, he said that there is no country in the world not currently independent that is more deserving of independence than Jamaica. Because Jamaica at that point in time was a leader within the developing world, had one of the first railway systems, one of the first electricity power systems. And in 1960, the information that Norman Manley would have had suggested that Jamaica was one of the richer developing countries of the world.
That promise and excitement of independence was never realized. The economy went off track beginning of the 1970s and never really fully got the traction that would lead to the kind of development, the kind of prosperity, the kind of growth that people had come to expect would take place. Our research had revealed that this was simply because the government made bad policy choices at critical junctures. That was what led to the idea that government needed to be able to call upon research capacity and advice outside of the government, outside of the public bureaucracy.
Where CAPRI comes in is in bridging that gap. CAPRI is an organization that looks at important questions that affect our society, our economy, our development, and seeks to answer those questions by finding relevant information that are not biased or tainted by politics or special interests. Facts that are needed to make realistic decisions about problems that affect our country.
It's very important that CAPRI maintains its independence from the government, from all political parties, from private sector and other special interest groups, because it's critical that when CAPRI arrives at a policy recommendation based upon its research, there is no question as to the independence of that so that its work can be accepted and can lead to effective implementation. CAPRI is really not in and of itself an implementing agency, but its concern is about effective implementation. And so to get that implementation done, it liaises with all concerned stakeholders. The government is obviously a very critical stakeholder.
We ensure that the research we produce does not collect dust on the shelf, but reaches the right ears. This is how, over the past 10 years, we are able to influence policies in areas such as debt, informal investment scheme, social support, and the mandate for NHT.
The new generation of Jamaicans must take responsibility for things they had no say in, things they did not cause. But we must take responsibility all the same in order to shape a future. We are a few good decisions away from the Jamaica that we want. Join us as we take responsibility for the future of our country.
Specially invited guests, our distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Raina Samuels, and I'm a researcher at CAPRI. The period of November 18th through to the 24th is being commemorated as Global Entrepreneurship Week. Different conversations have been taking place to equip entrepreneurs with critical information to assist them with launching their businesses or with revamping current ventures. I am delighted that this evening, CAPRI's conversation will highlight another aspect, the barriers to women entrepreneurship. Efforts towards improving women's entrepreneurial development have been increasing over the years, largely in recognition to its importance to poverty alleviation and economic growth. Many countries around the world have made it a priority to promote and support women's entrepreneurship. New women-owned businesses are being created every day, bringing with them new jobs, a positive influx in their local economies, and a strengthening of the communities in which they exist. However, female entrepreneurs have not flourished as would be expected, and the reason for this is not clear. Is it that women face obstacles in their quest to own their own businesses with all the benefits that come with that? This is the question we have set out to answer, and this evening, our Executive Director, Dr. Damien King, will present an assessment of the barriers to women's entrepreneurship in Jamaica. We would like to thank our sponsors, the European Union, represented here by Mr. Ricard Bardia-Devins, for sponsoring the project, supporting inclusive and participatory governance towards prosperity and fulfillment for all. This evening's proceedings will be moderated by Mr. George Davis, broadcast journalist. As we often do, this evening we will be taking questions from the audience using Slido. For those who are not familiar with Slido, please take a look at the screen. To use Slido, all you need to do is to connect to the Wi-Fi. The username is Mona Connect, and it is open. And there you go. Open your browser and go to slido.com. Enter the event code CAPRI. There you can post your questions and/or vote on other people's questions. We ask that you indicate your full name when posting your questions. I am looking forward to a lively and stimulating dialogue, and I encourage everyone to participate. Ahead of Dr. King's presentation, I would like to welcome Mr. Ricard Bardia-Devins, the EU representative, who will be sharing some remarks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to be here this evening for the presentation of this new CAPRI report, Closed for Business, discussing barriers to women's entrepreneurship and to have the opportunity to shortly explain why and for what purpose the EU is proud of supporting this new publication. Gender equality is right at the core of the European Union's values. The EU promotes gender equality and the empowerment of women across all areas of action, including economic empowerment of women. Our aim is to mainstream gender equality across most of the EU-funded initiatives in partner countries by 2020. And in addition, to increase resources targeted specifically at women's empowerment. The EU Gender Action Plan, it's a gender action plan of the European Union, sets the framework for our cooperation with partners internationally. And economic and social empowerment is a key priority of this plan. Women's economic empowerment is not just a moral, social, or legal obligation, but is a prerequisite for sustainable development and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Women's economic empowerment is a necessity to achieve peace, security, and economic prosperity throughout the world in a sustainable way. Investing in the potential of women and girls is to invest in society as a whole, and it is the responsibility of men and boys to the same extent as women and girls. When women can access decent economic opportunities, it sets off a virtuous cycle that improves gender equality and reduces poverty and vulnerability of women and communities. If provided with opportunities, women can make a tremendous impact to economies as entrepreneurs, employers, or employees. But the data we already have tell us how often women are disadvantaged and how enormous is the unused potential of their full participation in society. Policymakers need to unlock this potential, recognizing that women are an heterogeneous group with many differences in their motivations, intentions, and projects. they also have to take into consideration that the specific barriers and obstacles that women have to face, creating the so-called glass ceiling. It is important to identify and progressively remove these obstacles. It is a difficult and broad task that ranges from women's educational choices and their horizontal and vertical segregation at the school, to the need for balancing family responsibilities with working in competitive sectors, to some necessary legislative and regulatory reforms providing women with equal access in entrepreneurship opportunities, just to mention some of them. Several new policy approaches to supporting women in entrepreneurship are emerging. Many countries are exploring the potential of using public procurement to open up market opportunities for women and of providing more support for women entrepreneurs with dedicated business incubator and business accelerator programs, and the creation of an infrastructure risk capital. I would therefore like to acknowledge CAPRI extremely relevant and timely report. Timely because we are now in the National Entrepreneurship Week Policy Forum, which was held last week, and timely because of the recent declaration made by the Minister of State at the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, the Honorable Floyd Green, about the government intention to giving priority to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises as a driver of economic growth, setting aside 20% of the government procurement spending solely for the MSME sector. We acknowledge with much interest and support this initiative, and we hope that it will be followed by the necessary measures so that it can equally benefit male and female entrepreneurs. The CAPRI report gives us today the opportunity to bring new elements to a debate that will need to be continued with other stakeholders and in other venues in order to achieve new and more equitable policies to promote female entrepreneurship. For this reason, we are very satisfied to have supported the production of this report, and we are very keen to listen to its findings and recommendations. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Narda McLaren, Acting Director of Policy and Research at the Bureau of Gender Affairs. I am standing here representing my Senior Director, Mrs. Sharon Coburn Robinson. The government of Jamaica is committed to achieving gender equality, women's rights, and women's empowerment. The government of Jamaica has aligned its programs and policies to support the United Nations entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. Equally, to achieve the recommendations of the post-2015 development framework, this sees gender equality as a standalone goal, which is Goal 5. The government is also cognizant that women and men have different life experiences and frequently require differential treatment, resources in all sectors of society. Therefore, it is imperative that an effort is made to ensure that men and women are given equal opportunities and access to participate in the development of our nation. In a time as this, where strategic efforts is needed to create interventions, the Bureau of Gender Affairs commends the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI, for hosting this session, Closed for Business, Barriers to Women's Entrepreneurship, to explore challenges to arrive at practical and sustainable solutions to address these barriers. Top priorities for the government include equal visibility, empowerment, responsibility and participation of both women and men in public and private life, and equal access to and distribution of resources between women and men. As such, on March 7, 2011, Cabinet approved Jamaica's National Policy for Gender Equality. The aim of the policy is to mainstream gender within a human rights-based framework in all state institutions and their apparatuses to ensure that females and males have equal access to opportunities, resources, and rewards in order to eliminate discrimination based on gender and to promote sustainable human development. In accordance with the guiding principle of the National Policy for Gender Equality and a multi-sectoral approach and partnership, the Government of Jamaica continues to engage in collaboration and partnerships to strengthen efforts to ensure that no one is left behind as a result of enforced fiscal policies. As such, the government's gender sector plan is designed to achieve the following outcomes. These are socioeconomic, political, legal, and institutional environments and arrangements that facilitate and promote gender equity and gender equality. Women unpaid labor is valued and rewarded. The judicial system is free from gender biases, and the reproductive health and rights of women are fully protected. Also, that there are appropriate policy frameworks are established to ensure that gender inequities are addressed. To support these outcomes, the government has reiterated its commitment by way of Cabinet Decision 816, which facilitated the rebranding of the Bureau of Gender Affairs from the Bureau of Women's Affairs. This was done as part of the government's focus to refocus the work of the government to have its name reflected and focus on the work of women and men. In keeping with the principles of the MPGE, to support a framework, a more comprehensive and coordinated approach to fully integrate gender in every area of national life. We cannot address these barriers affecting women if a fulsome analysis is not done of the current realities of men and women in business and economics. To allow for economic and social empowerment of women and girls, a memorandum was signed by the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport and MICAF to promote women in business on November 2015. The ministry signed a MOU with the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture, and Fisheries to promote women in business. The objective is to facilitate more opportunities for women in micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. The agreement was designed to promote sustainable and productive entrepreneurial activities to generate income amongst disadvantaged women, particularly those living in poverty. The MOU will employ strategies and collaborative programs that will promote and encourage the involvement of women in entrepreneurship. This will be done through capacity building in ICT, financial, and business training. To date, 4 women entrepreneurs have been awarded a total of $1 million to strengthen their initiatives through the Women's Entrepreneurship Support Program. The Community Outreach through Partnership for Empowerment, COPE, is an initiative by the Bureau of Gender Affairs that was designed to increase the financial and partnership support for non-government and community groups, particularly women, that will assist in fulfilling the mandate of the Bureau to empower women to achieve their full potential. This aims to improve their contribution towards the achievement of our development goals. The first phase of the COPE initiative will consist of 8 community groups that are being supported through monthly grants in the form of subventions. The government have signed on through the Bureau of Gender Affairs to participate in the Win-Win Gender Equality Means Good Business program, which is being implemented in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is a strategic partnership between UN Women and the ILO and the European Union for the promotion of gender equality in the private sector. To date, 40 Jamaican private sector companies have promoted support for the women's empowerment principles. which aim to allow the full and equal participation of women in society, which focus specifically on strengthening women in leadership, in business, and their participation in the workforce, reduction of the gender pay gap, decent work, entrepreneurship, autonomy, and economic empowerment. Through the Bureau's robust gender mainstreaming program, the government has established a gender focal point network throughout ministries, departments, and agencies, and with non-government and civil society groups. Through this initiative, the government is able to sensitize and mainstream gender in the plans and programs of partners through workshops, seminars, training, and expositions that seek to empower women and girls and to eliminate gender discrimination. The gender mainstreaming program is guided by the national policy vision that says and envisions a society in which women and men have equal access to socially valued goods and are able to contribute to national development. The government of Jamaica remains committed to address the pervasive attitudes and underlying issues of discrimination that hinders the advancement of women in Jamaica. As such, the government aims to adopt, strengthen appropriate legislative and other measures, including sanctions where appropriate, prohibiting all discrimination against women, and establish a legal protection on the rights of women to achieve their full potential as equal contributors to society's development. This includes barriers that inhibit women from achieving their potential. We look forward to the findings of this report done by CAPRI as we keep the conversation going, as we work in partnership to ensure that women have a seat at the table and are able to fully contribute and advance in all spheres, particularly in economics. I thank you.
Good evening. So every once in a while, you ask a simple question. You know, it's like when you just scratch the surface of something and then it uncovers a rather larger hole than you expected. Kind of like the question of the impeachment inquiry going on now. And we asked a simple question. We went to the company's office and we asked them, what is the percentage of registered businesses that, jumping ahead, what is the percentage of registered businesses that are owned by men versus women? And from that one question, we became aware of the fact that businesses owned by women in Jamaica are fewer and smaller. The answer to our question was that 55% of businesses are registered by men. Now, considering that the adult population has a roughly equal distribution, in fact, there are slightly more women. This is a more gaping hole than it first appears. So we scratched a little further. We found data that suggested that of businesses, that 27% of the businesses that were owned by men have revenues, have turnover of at least $5 million a year. Whereas for women, not even 10% of their businesses turn over $5 million a year. So the difference in number of businesses is exaggerated when we look at the size of those businesses. The same thing shows up when we look at the distribution, look at the size of businesses by the number of employees. What we see is that women have more businesses if they are micro businesses, 1 to 5 employees. in all other employee size categories, men have more businesses. Women have fewer businesses, and the businesses are smaller. And the disparity is worsening. It's not getting better over time. So we asked, in a survey we conducted to try to dig a little deeper, we went island-wide and conducted a survey of 300 persons, either in business or about to go into business, thinking seriously about going into business. Of those already in business, we asked both those run by men and women, do you have expansion plans over the next 5 years? And 42% of the businesses owned by men had expansion plans. Only 34% of the businesses owned by women had plans to expand. Do you have plans to contract or close your business? In our survey, none of the men. 8% of the women. Then we went back to the company's office and said, instead of telling me the distribution by sex of all registered businesses, what is it for businesses registered in the last 2 years? Well, the men are lengthening the lead. Why is this? That's a question that our research set out to answer. It's a particularly peculiar discovery in Jamaica that there is such a gap. Because when you compare simply labor force participation rates in Jamaica, internationally, labor force participation by women in Jamaica is amongst the highest in the world. When you look at, the ILO tells us, women in managerial positions, Jamaica is #1 in the world. 60% of managerial positions are held by women. So we are not in a country where women are shrinking, no, wrong metaphor, where women are shame ladies, where when you get close to them, they close up. So that makes the underrepresentation in entrepreneurship even more glaring. So we sought to find out why in other data, but mainly through our survey. And the first thing we wanted to find out is whether this has to do with something innate to women or outside of women in the society. The answer to that is really important. This is not, let's be very clear, this is not a gender issue narrowly defined. Well, it's obviously a gender issue. It's not a women's issue. Having full participation in entrepreneurship of all groups is critical to economic growth, because you want to uncover options for growth amongst your entire society. Indeed, participation of women in entrepreneurship is correlated with economic growth. Moreover, there is a tremendous amount of evidence to suggest that women spend differently from men do. Women spend more on their family and on their communities. Women spend 60% more investing in their families than men do. So we get a better allocation of expenditure that is more pro-social if women can take their equal place in income earning opportunities. So the first thing we wanted to know is it the women's fault? So we threw up the usual stereotypical explanations. Maybe women have a lower tolerance for risk. You need to have an appetite for risk to go into business. So we asked our survey respondents about their appetite for risk. And what we found was not a statistically significant difference. We found a high tolerance for risk among entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs of both sexes. So forget that one. Fear of failure. How many of our entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs got into business because they did not have a fear of failure? Well, amongst those already in business, men clearly had no fear of failure by some margin. But amongst those who are potential business persons, women did better than men in having more confidence in not failing. So, inconclusive at best. Entrepreneurship. So here's how we tested entrepreneurship. We asked the question, can we buy you out? If we could give you a guaranteed income, an income equal to what you are likely to earn in your business, would you still go into business, or would you take the money and run? It turns out that men were actually more willing to take the money and run. And women exceeded men, both amongst the existing businessmen and the potential ones, in having entrepreneurship, in having that spirit of entrepreneurship, wanting to go into business even to make the same amount of money that they could earn from a job. Now, it takes a fair amount of confidence to go into business. So we asked a lot of questions relating to self-confidence in a number of different areas. Confidence in your ability to get the business going, to bring all the pieces together and get the business started. No significant difference. And this was asked of both groups, those already in business and those about to go into business. Confidence in your general business management skills. Well, the women are more confident. Confidence in your knowledge. Question we ask is, do you feel a need to get training or felt a need to get training before you went into business? Women had greater confidence in their general knowledge. Networking ability. A lot of businesses depend on your ability to network. Women had more confidence in their networking ability by a margin. Confidence in your knowledge of finance. Women exceeded men again. We went through a series of these that I'm not going to report on all of them. Knowledge, confidence in sales, confidence in innovation, confidence in human resource management. And the women were either equal in their confidence or were more confident than the men. So, we found nothing in terms of the personality characteristics to differ significantly between men and women to explain why women have fewer businesses and smaller businesses. But to go into business, because it is an enterprise of taking risk, requires some amount of support. So we start to look now outside of the individual. Having a mentor. How many existing business persons or potential business persons have a mentor? Few of the women in business said they had a mentor, but more of those who were thinking of going into business had a mentor. So an absence of mentorship does not explain the difference. Having a support group. Well, not a whole lot of our actual or potential business persons felt they had a support group, but as small as it was, again, there was no significant difference. So we said, well, when you're going into business, every business, you need some startup capital. You need financing. So we started to explore access to financing. Now, if you get financing, the sex balance is equal. But of those not yet in business, the vast majority of men were successful in their loan applications, and only 1/3 of the women with traditional banks. Were you successful in getting a loan from a commercial bank? The first significant difference that we found in our data. How many of you applied for a bank loan? First question was, having applied, did you get the bank loan? Well, this question is, how many apply for a bank loan? Well, men apply more than women, but that's not surprising. If you're unlikely to get the bank loan, then you don't waste your time. And we have established that this difference cannot be explained by the fact that the women are more timid. We asked, what is the extent to which you think you are taken seriously by commercial banks? Even before you get to the official application, just in your discussion with commercial banks and with the banking community, what is the extent to which you think you're taken seriously? Those already in business, it was equal. But amongst potential business persons, men were more likely to be taken seriously by the banking sector than by the traditional banking sector than the women were. I think we have a hypothesis. Interestingly, when we looked at access to financing through microfinancial institutions, we saw some evidence of a different pattern. Women are more successful accessing microfinancial institutions. Now, a part of this is the fact that women have smaller businesses. A part of having a smaller business is that you don't have access to the traditional banks. Jamaica National, which has a small business loan architecture, tells us that 72% of their loans over the last 5 years have gone to businesses owned by women. So we have a problem, and we have identified what seems to be one major gap that can explain why is it we have so few businesses owned by women and why those businesses tend to be small. Access to financing. What can we do about access to financing? It's not that this is a new problem, having women get access to financing. If you look around the world, you will see scores of programs trying to increase the access of women to financing for businesses. Many of which are limited and don't work well. So the problem is not new. But one solution that we have identified seems to hold great potential. And our recommendation is the establishment of a collateral registry, a transactions and collateral registry, which allows for the registering and therefore the use as collateral of movable assets. This has the potential and has been demonstrated as an effective way of increasing the incidence and the success of small businesses, of micro and small businesses. So it has that advantage to begin with of promoting new and small businesses. But the great thing about the collateral registry is that it makes the whole credit market more effective and more efficient. A lot of the efforts that we have seen around the world are setting up special financing schemes that bias women in their lending. Well, the problem with a special financing scheme is that it is only as good as the funding for that scheme. So it's expensive. It's expensive, and by definition, cannot increase access of all women to financing. It only helps those that can be financed out of the limited funds. A collateral registry impacts the entire market for credit and is inexpensive. It's the cost of a database. You don't have to fund the lending and subsidize the rate of interest. And there is technical assistance available to Jamaica to establish such a scheme, because we discovered in our research that the World Bank actually has a fairly comprehensive build-out of technical support for transactions and collateral registries. So we think that this is not only a first step, but a giant leap to solving what we think is at least a critical bottleneck to explain why we have an underrepresentation of women in businesses. Thank you.
6. Mic check, am I on? Check. All right. Good evening, everyone. All right, so we're going to do the question and answer via Slido. If at all the internet fails, I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. So in case you came in late, Slido is the app that you'll be using. Just log on to the Wi-Fi. The network is Mona Connect, MONACONNECT, Mona Connect. There's no password, so you'll be on. And once you're connected, you go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, slido.com. And once you're at slido.com, on the Slido page, enter CAPRI as the event code, you're seeing right here, and then you post your questions. I've seen some questions come in already. Some of them have the name of the person posing the question. A couple of them are anonymous. Don't leave any of them anonymous. Put your name there. And we will crack on when you are ready. All right, so slido.com and you connect. Before I go to the questions that have come through already, I want to get the initial thoughts of the two ladies and the gentleman here to any aspect of the presentation which may have, well, not caught their eye, but which may have stirred something, some response, some reaction. And Mrs. Miller Simpson, do you want to take first crack? What is it from what Dr. King shared just now that is resonating with you?
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Ethnie Miller Simpson, representing the Women Entrepreneurs Network of the Caribbean. I am heartened by some of the information that has been shared, and especially so against the background of how the organization that I'm a part of, how we started. We were really formulated out of an initiative by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, met in the Dominican Republic and had conversations about what were some of the barriers. Mm-hmm. Coming out of that, we received a small grant from the U.S. State Department, which we used to conduct our own research. I think this was about 2014, 2015. And it was done with 571 participants across 8 islands, not just Jamaica. So this is Trinidad, Guyana, St. Vincent and St. Lucia, Bahamas, Barbados, and Grenada. And just to share some of the numbers, and then for us to think about those numbers relative to the numbers that have been shared this evening. So the women were asked various questions, and the issues that were shared with us were the following. 84% of the persons polled had an issue with accessing financing. We had 77% indicating that they had an issue with information, financial information, not just the access to financing. 72% had issue with access to markets, 72% work-life balance, 70% networking opportunities, and 70% mentorship opportunities. So I smiled when I first came in contact with the information because we're seeing change and growth and actually positive change in comparing the data that we garnered, 3, 4, 5 years ago with the data that is being shared now. So that is actually quite encouraging from where we sit. The concern around access to finance and specifically access to credit is still a painful one. And as women in business, we are challenged by that. And I'm very interested in the feedback this evening. I don't know if we have any banks in the room, but I remember when the Credit Bureau was looking at localized scores in Jamaica, the organization I'm a part of, we were the first organization to sign that MOU to say, yes, we wanted to use localized scores. And after the presentation, I remember asking the question, they had a ranking of, or the rating, and I asked, the persons who fall between, say, C3 down to E. Did the banks have any interest in them? The answer was really they're high risk, etc., etc. And I asked the question again, who are those persons? Many of the persons in the room couldn't put a face with the persons from C3 down to E. Some of those persons are actually the persons who are holding up the economy of Jamaica, SMEs. Yes. Some of those persons had lives before, and due to the last recession, they were wiped out. But yet still, they're the persons who ended up going into business, puttering around and making it work to the point where they were contributing to the economy. Yet still, the traditional banking sector is not looking at those persons because they're high risk. They had credit issues, etc. Quite a few of the women who are a part of our organizations fall in that category. So from where we sit, we recognize that there are issues with traditional banking. Just today in a conversation with a consultant who is here through UN Women, we're talking about it and saying, listen, we really need to look at, is there any other alternative to traditional banking? We've discussed it at our board meetings to ask, you know, what if we came up with a bank? Who would fund us? If we went to the government and said, listen, some of the money that is given from the IMF for developing the sector, what if you gave it to someone else? What do you think the outcome would be? So I'm putting that as a question for us to consider this evening.
Yes. Hugh Johnson is the president of the Small Business Association of Jamaica. Hugh, your initial thoughts?
I must first commend CAPRI for their research work that they're doing, because as you would have known over the years, one of the bugbear to us is we are unable to make informed decisions because of lack of information. So I commend CAPRI for this analytical work that they're doing to help us to understand more of the issues at play so we can make more informed decisions. But as it relates to the presentation by Dr. King, it has opened my eyes to a lot of things. It is eye-opening to me. But I would want to say here that entrepreneurship must exist in a complete ecosystem. And even though we have identified one of the reasons for the disparity is lack of access to financing, I would want to ask for us to look on even some broader issues because if that ecosystem is not completed, we're going to still have this challenge as it relates to moving forward, even if we would solve the access to financing issue. Comes to mind are things like the dual role played by women as against business first, family first business, as they would refer to male as having business first interest, then the family, and the female would have a family first interest, then the business. How significant is that, and how it influenced the whole, caused us to be where we are? There's also another sore point that we fail to address significantly is sexual harassment. Yes. How far does this go to determine where we are? And as it relates to moving to be able to clear some of these hurdles with access to financing, to look on even other form of financing outside of loan financing, like equity financing. Yes. And there's where we have been pressing government for quite some time, and CAPRI can help us here with empirical data. But we believe if we would be able to access like the micro stock market, the nano stock, that would be able to help some of these micro enterprises to access equity financing and be able to scale up in a more meaningful way.
Hear you on that. Thank you for that, Mr. Johnson. Beverly Darby Collins is Senior Director, Social Services, Home Economics Unit at RADA. Your initial thoughts, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Let me greet you all this evening, and let me also commend the team who did this study. I'm kind of derailed by some of the findings, because all along we thought that women were not willing to borrow, they were not risk takers, and so many of the other issues that came out. But for me, I work with rural women, farm family women, and youth, and some men, because we are not gender biased. But in my unit, in RADA, we spend a lot of time teaching, training the women business skills, teaching them skills that are income generating, and then teach them business skills that could assist them to establish businesses. What I find, though, is that the women will, for example, develop a product, and we assist them to do that, but they don't seem to have that drive to take that product much further. So it remains almost like a hobby. So they do a small amount, and they will sell that, but then expanding that is, you don't find too many of them wanting to do that. Yes. For fear of borrowing, taking the risk to borrow, for fear of borrowing and then having issues to pay back, especially when the payment is late and they have to pay the late fees and the interest, additional interest and so on. They fear that, and we have had that experience. What we have been doing, though, in recent times is to try, one of the other issues I should point out is that we tend to emphasize from the agricultural aspect, agro-processing. And the other issue we have with that is they don't have suitable facilities in their communities to do agro-processing and put products on the market that can be sustainable to the family and to what they're doing, their businesses. So they tend to stick to this small unit and not being able to support themselves sustainable from it. What we have done is to approach the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, and they have given us, across the parishes, 7 agro-processing facilities, HACCP certifiable facilities, and basic equipment that they could start with. And the aim of that is to assist them to expand on what they're doing using a suitable facility that will allow them to put the products on the market and not have issues with the certifying bodies. Yes. So we have been doing that. We have tried that. But we still find that not too many of them are taking it up. Mm-hmm. And one of their issues is, again, as is pointed out, the access to finance. Yes. They don't have enough adequate access to finance. And when their finance is available, yes, they're not willing to borrow. So that's one of the main issues we have.
Hear you on that. Thank you for that. All right, Dr. King, before I go to the Slido, is there anything that you heard from your 3 colleagues that was either an ancillary point in the research or, I don't want to say tangential, but even so, was there anything that you could file under those 2 headings based on what was said and the gathering of the data that produced the report that you presented today?
No, but I was happy to be reminded of the more or less general alignment with the results of the study that was done 5 years ago, with the information we are finding now, except for improvement in some areas. So, yeah.
Very well. All right. There are a couple of people here named Anonymous. You must be related. Remember, please just put your name there. You know, we're not going to give it to Nigel Clark to collect extra taxes from you. Just put your name there so it makes the occasion better, a bit richer. All right. I'm going to start, in case you came in late, Slido is what we're using for the questions. Go there, follow the instructions. The Wi-Fi is open, Mono Connect. And go again? It's not working? It's not working for some persons? All right, crack on. It will work for you soon. Grace Lindo is asking, she says, we have a collateral registry for movable property called NSIP. How has the establishment of the registry led to a greater market for credit for women? And this question seems to be one for Dr. King.
Well, NSIP is not broadly used. So the first thing that we need to do is to promote NSIP so that more people know about it. And secondly, to get the technical assistance that we can to see if we can build NSIP out to be more effective, to do what we wanted to do.
Grace, that satisfies you? Where are you? Show a hand. Yes?
Right, I don't have the answer to that question, but I think if we get the technical assistance that I'm suggesting we seek, then they can do that analysis.
Okay. But hold on, Grace, are you saying, before you put down the mic, are you saying that rather than the collateral registry as submitted by Dr. King, NSIP already exists and building it out would obviate the need to create something new and that could serve the purpose? Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. We do have a collateral registry which takes care of movable property, so you can use your artwork, creatives can use their intellectual property, and perhaps get credit from the institutions. There isn't a lot of PR around NSIP. It has now been somewhat closed. It's behind a paywall, and I do think that if we can get women to know what NSIP provides, they will be using their produce, they'll be using their creativity much quickly than how they are now. And perhaps will be accepted by the banks as well, who tend to prefer land as security.
Thank you on that.
And just to align behind that, the paywall is not the issue. I mean, there is money to be made by the persons who want to borrow because they're borrowing for business, and there's money to be made by lending to persons who are going to be successful in business. So the issue really is getting the banks to use it and building PR around it so more people know about it.
Yeah, and for those of you who are wondering, NSIP, National Security Interest in Personal Property Registry. Thank you, Trudian, for working out the acronym for us. All right, does that satisfy you, Grace, for the moment? Great. All right. Anonymous asks, how did the COJ information indicate that the businesses owned by women are smaller in terms of revenue? And there's a rider here that says private companies don't file financials.
The Companies Office only gave us information on the number of businesses. The other information came from our survey. It was our survey that told us what is the relative size of turnover for businesses owned by men versus women. Our island-wide representative survey.
Right. Anonymous, does that satisfy you? Yeah. Oh, you all right? Let's see. All right. Derek Wilkes is asking, did the socio-economic background of female loan applicants or their marital status affect success in securing seed funding from traditional loan sources?
We did not cross-reference it with socio-economic status.
All right.
Or
Derek?
marital status.
That satisfies you? Oh, you're cool with that? Very well. Dennis Jones is asking, what information was obtained on sectoral activities of men and women, and did that suggest significant differences in problems?
We didn't ask about business sector. You see, one of the problems we have, and we're generally having surveys, is that you have to resist the temptation to come up with a survey instrument that requires that you're going to ask 2 hours worth of questions. Because the longer your survey, longer the survey takes, is the less willing people are to participate in it. So we had to make a lot of trade-offs and only try to ask about the information we thought was going to be potentially useful.
Another anonymous. How many of your 300 interviewees were in the quote-unquote potential business owner category?
We had equal numbers of both.
All right. This one is for Ethnie Miller Simpson. I have never heard of WENC. How is that entity working to facilitate female entrepreneurship? And can you briefly describe your activities?
Okay. I'm very happy for that question
I know you
because
would be, yes.
it gives me an opportunity to PR, that's one. But it raises another issue as to how non-profit organizations survive. When this organization was started, it was actually just out of interest. And we bootstrapped it to a certain point. And most of us, if not all of us who are involved in the organization, are entrepreneurs ourselves. So you can just imagine how difficult it is trying to grow your own business while trying to grow a nonprofit organization. Secondly, in terms of accessing funding, there is some funding out there, but you have to be very relentless. You have to be really cued in to the agencies that have the funding and be willing to go the miles, to wait on the disbursements. And when I say go the miles, I'm really serious. I remember applying for, I think, the only grant funding opportunity when Portia Simpson Miller was Prime Minister. It wasn't disbursed until the JLP was in power. I am not exaggerating. It was disbursed, it was a grant opportunity by the government and Heart Trust. And the numerous times you have to resubmit, even to the point where some of the suppliers that we had initially selected either went out of business, their prices changed, and we just had to keep going through all of that. I'm talking about probably about 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, 2.5 years. So it takes grit, it takes determination, it takes the belief in something bigger than yourself. It takes a lot to really build a nonprofit organization. So any nonprofit organization, CAPRI and others that are in the room that exist past 5 years, 10 years, they deserve medals.
Yes.
Yeah? WENC, as we are called, or WEN Caribbean, we have our ups and downs, meaning we started out with a plan of being in 10 Caribbean countries. We're only in about 4 at this point in time. We've had to restart 2. The one that started in the Bahamas was decimated with the 2 hurricanes that hit the Bahamas. And there have been times when you just have to pick up a phone and call the other women in the countries and say, listen, are you alive? So the organization has been around now for about 6 years. And our levels of success, various levels of success, in the sense that we've had numerous fora where we've discussed issues affecting women in business. We conducted the survey, got that information. We partnered with the Caribbean Association of SMEs and attended different functions in Venezuela, in the Dominican Republic, even taking some ideas and sort of formulating an opportunity that I'm waiting to share either with Dr. Clark himself or actually the coalition that is now existing between JMMB and BNS. So I'm keenly aware that the traditional banking system and sector isn't working. What WENC wants to put on the table is something a little bit different, and it's a blend using the Grameen Bank plus a couple of secret sauces, which I cannot at this point share.
Yes.
But you can look out for it because I believe it can work. And in terms of the last part of the question, how to access us, there is a website. We have our monthly meetings, our quarterly meetings, and we are on every social media space. So just look for WENC or WEN Caribbean.
Very well. This question from Glenroy, does RADA, and this one would be for Mrs. Darby Collins, does RADA have research that confirms that women are less likely to follow through, or is it purely anecdotal experience?
We have no research to verify that.
Yes.
It's like a day-to-day experience. Because we work with the women like every day across the parishes. It's a day-to-day experience with them.
All right. Dr. King, this question again from Anonymous. listener not reading any more anonymous, yes? Please put your name there. Please, just put your name there, yes? It's better if you even make up a name, yeah? All right. Was your data on loan success disaggregated by race?
No.
All right. What about interest rates?
And I mean,
oh.
Again, the purpose of the research was to identify barriers to women's entrepreneurship. So it's not that the race question is not an important question, but it's a different piece of research.
Yeah. Yeah. What about interest rates, this question posits? You can get a car loan at 7%, but loans for business, if you have no collateral, is sometimes in excess of 15%. There's a question in there, Doc. Can you lift it out and answer it?
Well, we were comparing like with like. So we were trying to tease out what are the sex-based differences.
Yeah.
So the structure of interest rates, while it's important for some questions, wasn't important to the question that we were asking, because all we were asking about were business loans. So consumer loans never came into it.
Yeah. This question I'm going to put to Mr. Small Business Association of Jamaica President Hugh Johnson. Jay Coram says, why are women not taken seriously when they apply for a business loan? From your perspective and what your members say, how can you answer that?
I think, because as you would have known, I'm not a banker, so it's very difficult for me.
But from the experiential perspective of what they would say happens to them when they interface with the banks. That's why I put it to you.
From a patriarchal point of view, we know that society is steep in that way. We have had to take issue with banks before because this female would apply for a loan. Loan has been approved, but signing the final papers, they were asking, your husband need to sign it too. So we see that as unacceptable to us. And luckily, I've seen within about 3 months, the banks changed the application and stopped asking that question. So I think it from that perspective,
yes,
that they have designed their questionnaire, their application in a particular way with a particular mindset, and that is what we need to speak out loudly against to get some changes there. Probably there might be other issues as it relates to, as a survey would point out, the success rate of women in applying for a loan. But from a wider perspective, and these are governmental issues that we take up with them, because they are already making billions from 25% of the cohort of the population. They aren't really interested in going further or adjusting their modalities to capture more people. And we think governmental policies can force them into broadening the base. A simple thing like in other jurisdictions, you would have a commercial bank requirement for minimum standard of 60% of your portfolio must be in loan. In Jamaica, we have like in the 20s, and you're still being classified as a commercial bank. You're not lending money, you're not a commercial bank, you're rent seekers. So those are some of the policy framework that we think can change to get banks to do banking. And and I must say too that our experience in the small business sector is that women are more attentive to their business than even men. So I can't see why they aren't more successful and even doing more business.
Mrs. Darby Collins, from your experience speaking with the women you have interactions with, is there anything that you could put forth as a trend, as a commonality then to say, well, these are the reasons most or some women say caused them not to get the loan when they went to sit with a banker?
From experience, I know there are organizations and agencies that has offered small loans to some of these women. And what I have observed is that the amount of funding that is available in these schemes is not enough. So when they do apply, only a few tend to get approval and access the loan. In terms of them going to banks, I have not had many experiences with that.
Hear you on that. Dr. King, Denise Chavans, UN Women, is asking. She says, the findings that there were no significant differences in risk tolerance belie what women in our program say. This says, did you control for the size of the company? What I'm saying that this is, did you account for the size of the company? Am I correct?
Statistically controlled.
Okay.
You can see whether the differences matter when due to the size of the company. So men in bigger companies
Yes.
are much more risk tolerant. Women in small companies, it's going to be different. So you have to control for the size of the company.
All right, Dr. King, you can take the question from that.
That's not a factor, an artifact in the data.
All right, I wanted to straighten out the question for him. Yes, Dr. King, your turn.
Yes, we control for the size of the company. My question to you, in your information, is did you control for sex? In other words, did you make a comparison with men? Because what we found in ours is that there was not a difference in risk tolerance. Now, I mean, it's only one study, but we certainly found that women had the same risk tolerance.
If I may,
yes.
Something that I sort of wanted to bring to the fore too is in terms of the impact of failure of a woman in business and the impact of failure for a man in business. Based on how the data is built up, women, by virtue of earning and growing and being able to build your business, 60%, as you said, from your information, 60 cents of every dollar basically goes back to her family or to the community. So
what we said is women spend 60% more than men do,
yes. Right,
on family and community.
Correct. And in terms of the impact, what I want to get at is when a woman's business fails, the immediate impact is that of her children not going to school, is that of not being able to put food on a table, etc., etc., as opposed to when a man's business fails, the impact is not necessarily the same.
Right.
So that is something that I think we need to explore a little bit more. And in terms of helping women to grow their businesses because of the reverse impact and direct impact, where if a woman's business grows, the direct impact also stands true. You know, so it's likely that she's able to afford to send her child to a different type of school. That child may not just go to primary school, but then be able to go to high school or tertiary education and so on. So I think there's a little bit of an area there that we should discuss a little bit further in terms of impact and the failure of businesses, what the impact is likely to be on women and their companies and their families.
And this is why we argued that the importance of this work is beyond the gender issue. It's a gender issue, but the impact on the community and the society is beyond the gender issue and why it's important.
Dr. King, did you find that age played a role in women's position as, oh, it just refreshed, let me find it back. Did you find that age played a role in women's position as business owners and their access to loans?
We did not control for age.
All right. Someone asked a question about the take the money and run. Trudy and Henry. Could the take the money and run question be misinterpreted to mean self-sufficiency versus dependence?
Well, it certainly overlaps with the question of dependence. In fact, that was the first thing that occurred to us, that being in business for the same amount of money that you could earn in a job is a question of not only the thrill of being in business, but also about wanting to be independent.
Yes.
So absolutely.
Right.
And I think that's a good challenge.
Yes. Pascal is asking, is there anything in your research that speaks to women having to deal with a second life at home as a deterrent for having a business?
Well, we did interrogate the extent to which there was family support. And in our sample, we found that there was a sufficient amount of family support. And we also interrogated the extent to which there was assistance with domestic responsibilities. And even though we found a difference, it was not a significant difference. It was not a large difference. But you see, one can't interpret that to mean that having to be responsible for the home is not itself a challenge, because men are not going to report that they don't have support for domestic responsibilities if they don't have domestic responsibilities.
Yes.
So that could still be an issue.
Yeah. I was waiting for this question from Anonymous again. It says, when you say business owner, how much of the business did they own? 100%, 51+%, what?
Well, it was at least 51%, but I don't think that detracts from the results in any way.
This question is looking to the future. I'm going to ask it now. It says, if you were to do a follow-up study, what is the question that you would now most like to ask in light of what you found?
That's actually a pretty good question, because, as I said, we can't design a survey that's going to explore every possible direction. But now that we have narrowed down the financing as a big issue, we would really like to do a survey to explore what is the obstacle to the financing. And so we can get a better idea of how to solve it.
Yeah, it feeds into this issue now, because this is a discussion point being raised by Dion more than a question. Dion Palmer. I'm going to put it to Hugh and Mrs. Miller Simpson. She says, Dion Palmer says, the sectors in which women are involved will be helpful because some banks may choose not to lend to some sectors. Do you think there is credibility in this as a point to support what Dr. King and his team have found? Mrs. Miller Simpson, you first.
That is correct. And then if we look at the sectors that more women are involved in, it is likely that you find, there's less inclination to lend to those sectors.
Yes.
For example, when you look at soft furnishings versus, let's say, the kind of furniture that ends up in courts or Singer, for example, what we found from just going across the island and having meetings through RADA, which I must commend, when we just started out, we actually partnered with them because, of course, we had no money to host meetings such as these. So what we did was partner with RADA, and we had meetings in every single parish. And we found that the dynamic varied from parish to parish. And when you started asking some questions as to what businesses women were involved in, there's some parishes which are more agro-focused, for example, and then there are others that, yes, they're agro-focused. However, you had a situation where the men took charge of certain crops as opposed to others for women. Yeah? Where it concerns now really getting into the financing for jams and jellies versus a tech company. Companies are more leaning towards the tech companies. And how many women do you find are owning a tech company and pushing technology? Speaking from the perspective of grant opportunities that have actually been offered in Jamaica, which we become aware of, and we share that with our members, energy, technology, and I think there are 2 or 3 other areas, money go back every year.
Yeah.
Because they're targeting women in some of those sectors, and we don't have enough women in those sectors. Yeah. So it is quite correct.
Hugh, Dion's point allows me to introduce this. So for women who wanted to, say for instance, you wanted to open a business in Papine, but you wanted to do hair and nails, and the banker said, but there are many hairdresser shops there, and so you get marked down, but you get registered, recorded in Dr. King's study as having been denied access to financing to do your business. So Dion's point about the sectors that women being in and how that acts as a barrier to financing itself, your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, because as you would have seen, the practice of the banks, they go for real asset as collateral and fixed asset, while for the most part, women tend to gravitate to consultancy and even, as you said, soft
yeah, the hearing aids. Yeah.
And I think, and Dr. King rightly pointed out earlier, that we need some technical assistance in helping the banks to understand risk, because I think that is the greatest hurdle to them accepting even the SIPA that we have gone through took so many years to go through, and we have it now, the collateral registry.
Yeah.
It's not being utilized because I think they don't understand it, and because they are making money where they are, they just shy away from it. So we think that technical assistance in these areas can go a far way in helping us to understand better and to get them operationalized.
Dr. King, a chance for you to emphasize this point about the collateral registry, because this question says, well, this point, did the women say or believe that their failure at getting bank loans was due to a lack of collateral? That's a question. And if not, then how would a collateral registry help them? So there's a gap there that they wanted to fill.
Well, we didn't ask what was the reason why they failed to get a bank loan, and that is why I said further work would mean delving more into that area. But we do know that in the credit market, the biggest obstacle to getting business loans is collateral, is the absence of collateral. So what a collateral registry does is it opens up collateral to a whole new range of assets that, and therefore has the potential to expand the size of that market by multiples, because very few people have fixed assets or in kinds of business where you have assets that can be used as collateral. And so to be able to use movable assets just opens a range of possible collateral assets much wider.
And although, yes,
Just to add, another dynamic that should be added is that of credit and credit history and prior exposure and whether or not persons are credit worthy.
Yes.
Because quite a few of the women who we have in our organizations, these are women who had a house before, had a car before, had something before, the loan didn't go well.
Yes.
They are now listed as bad credit or high risk, and that is part of the reason why they're not getting funding.
Yeah. This wasn't examined by the study, but this point is being raised. We can discuss. What is currently being done to reduce stereotypes against female entrepreneurs as it relates to receiving financial support from institutions? Is this real, or is this a figment of someone's imagination that there are stereotypes that lead to the barriers that are highlighted, and the main one in the Jamaican context that Dr. King found?
Well, I'll tell you what is being done about that. CAPRI just completed a study which we presented this evening, which addressed many of those stereotypes and was able to undermine the stereotypes.
Yeah.
So that is what is being done. We just did it.
Stereotypes debunked, yes?
And from the perspective of the women who are in business, you have to get to a point where this playing field is level. So what we have is a situation where the women have to play catch up. In talking to business owners, some persons have said to us, listen, I don't believe in this women empowerment stuff and the equity and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to call any names, right? But I'm speaking from a position of knowledge, having that conversation and having business owners look back and say, listen, we hire equally, we shouldn't have to hire women versus men. We shouldn't even be having this conversation.
Yes.
And even to the point where other associations that are run by men, when we are in different fora, talking about women empowerment, talking about the implementation of the women empowerment principles, there is scant regard for women, and it is done publicly. We joked about it earlier when we came in, because I've even said to Hugh a couple of times, we've knocked heads, and he knows exactly what I'm talking about. It is still done, and we have persons in positions of authority in this country who are still behaving as if that this is not an issue. And they give lip service to it, or publicly, all the niceties are said, and then when you stand by the bar or you sit over coffee, then you really hear, boy, this is foolishness. It is still happening. It is still happening.
So these people you speak of, are you saying that in real terms, they use their influence to percolate an idea through their staff to say, a woman comes for a loan to do business. If a man comes and a woman comes for the loan, give the man, don't give the woman.
It will not be said. it will not be said. When we look at how the women empowerment principles are being implemented, and you have a Nestle that has just joined on. How many companies now? 45 companies in Jamaica have signed on. A year ago, we had 0. Good?
Yes.
And we are saying that these issues have to now be filtered right throughout an organization. I see Mr. Is it Jeff? Mr. David at the back there that represents the Employers Federation, right? HR managers now need to take this information and say, listen, it needs to percolate right through the organization. There needs to be more information shared. I want to turn on my television set. I said this today. I want to turn on my television set and see an ad that talks about the women empowerment principles being implemented and what it means. Flo just had, is it paternity leave, parental leave, for not just persons who birth a child, but someone who adopted a child. Those are things that need conversation. I want to see ads on television showing that. So a child, my little friend there, Nadine's little baby, sitting in her lap, when she sees that on television, she says, oh, that's now a part of my reality. Having these conversations is good, but it needs to go further.
Thank you for that. Hugh?
I would love if Ethnie could clear the air on her
Knocking heads.
earlier reference. Because we have had encounter in meetings, but I must tell you that what she has just referred to, it's not one of my positions. I believe in supporting the women movement, and I don't want the ethnic to take one person's perspective to judge the entire male.
You, we didn't doubt you. We didn't doubt you. Fret not. Gracelyn.
I'll say something further. Yes. You know, that I'll give an example. Procurement, and Dr. King talked about it, that 20% that the government is now indicating for SMEs. We are grateful for that. We are thankful for that. When we had the last MICAF meeting and it appeared as though this is now being pushed through Parliament, etc., kudos for that. We applauded that. I am still asking what percentage of public procurement will be earmarked for women. Still asking.
All right.
Still asking.
Submission.
Thank
Gordon
you.
House. Grace Lindo is on fire, it seems. She asks, listen to this one, is low land ownership by women the real underlying problem? Can vesting land in women overcome the credit problem in a shorter time frame than a registry?
Well, I think it speaks to the same issue. If, for example, we have a situation where married or common law couples are in the habit of registering land in the name of the man, then that's a manifestation of the collateral problem. So those are really two different ways to solve the collateral problem. You know, either ensuring that, you know, trying to get more women's names on land titles or establishing the registry. That don't seem to me to be an either-or situation.
You're not mutually exclusive.
We should be able to move forward on both of those fronts. But there's a fear, it is likely that the problem we are picking up with loans has to do with many of these pervasive sexual biases, and the land registration is only just one of them.
Yeah.
But I'm quite sure there are many of them if we dig more deeply, which we now need to do.
Yes. Denise Niren.
I mean, there's an anecdote that I have as well that supports this. A woman I know who is the founder and now the owner of one of the largest businesses in Jamaica. And in interviewing her in this research, she said that when that business was started by her in the early 1990s, her husband had to personally guarantee the loan. It was her business.
Yep.
On the point of anecdotes, let me drop this one.
And this is a woman and business that is well known to everybody.
Yeah, but listen to this one though, Dr. King. When I was in high school, there was the big, in Spanish Town, the big pastry place, confectionery place was Cake World. Okay, so you persons of a certain age would know that there was a divorce And assets went to her, assets went to him. He built Captain's Bakery. Cake World, which was the forerunner in the series then. Cake World vanished very quickly, and the captain gone to Cayman Islands. I think it was in Antigua. It have about 5 or 7 stores here, and huge. Feeding into the perception among people, the reason I mention it is this, that at a certain level, women can't run business. And I'm wondering if some of the people who say this, and I've heard this several times, which is why I have the anecdote ready to put forward, if the people who believe this are also some of the people, as you said, Ethnie, who are in control of the levers of the resources to give to women at various levels of the entrepreneurial continuum to get the loans, to access financing.
Some of that is actually quite true. Going a little bit further, you will find that a woman starts a business, as has been the case. Things fall apart, there is a divorce. The woman may have been the motivator of that man. She may have started the business, but then he started to manage it. Why? Because she went and had children. And then he becomes the face of that business. He's really seen as the one who is really the business. What can then happen in a divorce is that, you know, it's a situation now where that woman feels that the business that she built out of love, etc., the emotional connection that she may have to it, is such that she said, listen, no, I don't wish to continue. The reverse is happening where there are women who start a business. There's no support from the husband. After the divorce, she continues. So there are other dynamics which I know Dr. King probably wouldn't have tested for in this particular survey, right? But you do have situations now where women want to continue, women want to build large businesses, but there are other factors, and I can, again, speak from personal experience here. Crime in Jamaica and business and women. That's a dynamic that needs to be explored.
Yes.
Because when a woman has to go home late at night, and she's the one who has to lock up. I remember closing my door one evening, and I looked and I saw things moving where there was no tree. And I calmly just locked, went into the vehicle, went out, locked the outside gate. This is someone else's property, yes, and drove home. And I shook like a leaf after I'd done all that. And for about a week, I said, no, not going back there for this week. And afterwards, I said, you know what? This is mine. And I went back and continued. Yeah. Now, I said it earlier, there are a couple of variables that the women who support women, you have to lean on each other for that kind of support and grit. I know you talked about support in the survey. But when we talk about some of these issues and then find other business opportunities that come out of distress. So another woman said, you know something, I think I'm going to start a security company, and I want all of your women to be a part, to be my clients. So there are further opportunities that come out of these situations.
We're wrapping now. 2 minutes, well, you have up to 2 minutes to make your final comments. You may not need all of the 2 minutes. But just before we do that, someone asked, where can they find the results of that WENC study from 5 years ago?
It is listed on our website, and primarily that's the only place that it is currently listed. Different organizations have actually referenced it. The GEM report has referenced it. We've used it in other presentations overseas, but it's on our website.
Again?
www.wencaribbean.org.
Okay, all right. Mrs. Darby Collins, starting with you, your perspective on what was discussed tonight, and where do you think we can move from here to changing the complexion of what Dr. King found?
I think that we need to be looking at how to get financing in other agencies other than the commercial banks, yes, so that women can access it more easily. If we depend on the commercial banks. They may never go there. Or if they do, they may never be approved. So we need to be looking at ways and means of getting finances into other agencies and institutions where women can access it.
Thank you. Hugh Johnson.
As it relates to the issue at hand, my eyes have been opened to a lot of things that anecdotally I thought was different. So I'm happy for this research. And as you would have known, any successful country, they are steep on R&D.
Yes.
And I must again commend CAPRI for this wonderful work and ask each of us to lobby our members of parliament or ministers of government for more resources to be put in these areas, because it's only as we get empirical data can we make informed decisions to take ourselves out of this hole. Because as we would have known over the years, governments, successive governments, have been doing interventions and they don't seem to be working.
Yes.
And we believe it's because we are moving on the wrong premise or using anecdotal information instead of empirical data. So if each of us take it as our charge to lobby government, grant funders, to put resources in institutions like CAPRI so that more empirical data can be mined for us to move forward, I think it's a correct way to go and a more practical way to go.
Thank you. Mrs. Miller Simpson.
I agree with you in terms of, let me start first by saying kudos to Dr. King and Dr. Thorburn and the team, because you're right, we do need data. And as we're hearing tonight, there are further questions that will formulate hypotheses and more inquiry. Secondly, I'm agreeing with you that there needs to be a broadening of the spectrum. One, look at credit and alternate financing opportunities and institutions. Two, the donor agencies that are in the room, take a risk on not just government. Some of the money that is being given to government to build out the sector, as of next year, there'll be another organization. Have a look at it, invite us in, ask the questions, and take a risk on the women who are going to be behind that. When we think of further broadening, the procurement percentage, the 20%, I am saying it again, and I'm hoping this gets to Minister Green. We talked about it before. I'm hoping that he will look at it again. That 20%, what percentage of that 20% can now be dedicated to women SMEs? When Walmart, ExxonMobil, Pepsi, and all of those big companies sat down and met with Elizabeth Vasquez, who started We Connect International and brought in Vital Voices, they sat and they looked at the manufacturing sector and said it is women who are really spending. We saw that tonight in the data. And as a result of that, the companies then started building more gender-focused products. So a woman walking out of a supermarket with a baby in her hand and a bag, she then waved her foot at the back of the tailgate of her vehicle so that the back will open. Industry, we need more of that. So the employers who are in the room, we need to talk to the small entrepreneurs and say, listen, what do you need? I was a part of an entrepreneurship exercise in Manhattan where a small company, which was actually run by a Jamaican by birth, Team Epiphany, his name is Coltrane Curtis. He was actually adopted by Porto Novelli, and you talk about mentorship. They created a mentorship program that I was a part of with the State Department. And what they did was they adopted a small business, and he said, what I need help with is finding a space. I can't afford rent. I'm looking forward to see which company in Jamaica is willing to take in entrepreneurs that you are going to put your money where your mouth is, and say to them, you need help. What help do you need? Rent out that spot over there. Instead of charging you X rate, I'll charge you a lower percentage. That is the kind of change that we want and the broadening of the spectrum that we really are looking for.
Thank you. Dr. King.
You know, I think the Women's Entrepreneurship Network of the Caribbean really does a tremendous job looking at all the various aspects of this problem. But I want to push back on one particular area that you mentioned. There's always a temptation for us to deal with a problem that affects an entire group with a carve-out, with a narrow solution that benefits a tiny share of that group, and we think we have solved the problem for the group. You know, an outrageous example of this was when Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe confiscated land from white farmers, gave it to a handful of his friends, and claimed he was doing something for black people in Zimbabwe. So when the government carves out 20% of procurement for small and medium businesses, it is not helping the small and medium business sector. It is helping only those who get the 20% procurement.
Yes.
And governments have a tendency of trying to address broad-based problems with carve-outs, with setting up a special fund that is going to provide funding for only those who benefit from the funding.
Yes.
So we need to try and address this problem really at its root and in a way that affects and benefits potentially the entire sector. So my fear is that if you are successful in getting the government to identify a share of that 20% that goes to women, then the government is going to say, well, we've helped women.
Yes, absolutely.
And so we want to identify the source of the problem and to make the whole system work efficiently, which is why we are particularly keen on making this registry work. Because of the nature of the businesses that women seem to be more tending to go into, and because small and medium business financing seems to go disproportionately to them, we think the registry is one of the solutions that can affect the sector on a broad scale. But we want to look at solutions like that.
Thank you very much. Well, you've been a good audience, ladies, gentlemen, anonymous, everybody else. Very good. Thank you for coming, and the formal part of the evening's proceedings is over. Thank you.
As we bring this evening to a close, I would like to thank our moderator and all the panelists for sharing their knowledge and insight with us. This truly made for a rich discussion. Thanks to our sponsors, the European Union, and to all the staff at CAPRI who made this event possible. And of course, I would like to thank you, our audience, for your valuable contributions and for making this evening's event a success. We look forward to your continued support. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to continue this discussion, please do so as you partake in some light refreshments that are provided on the outside. Thanks again and have a wonderful evening.